Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to episode 70 of Talk4, the quickfire podcast where we ask four great questions to unique and interesting people. Behind the mic today is your host, Louis Skupien. That's me. And let me introduce our very special guest for today. Absolutely crazy, Sam Hardy. He's going to be answering some questions today. Sam, welcome aboard the Talk4 podcast, man. Please do say hi to the fine people listening and just give us a quick rundown of who you are and what you do before I shoot some questions.
Cool. Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me on the Talk4 podcast with you there, Louis. My name is Sam Hardy, and for the last 15 years, I've dedicated my life to base jumping, and it's taken me all around the world, jumping off of different mountains and buildings and flying my wingsuit close to the ground. And it's been a really, really epic last few years. And yeah, I'm here to talk about, I guess, the journey and the adventures I've had.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, guys, you just have to you have to see some of these videos. They are absolutely incredible. I mean, I showed my parents a couple of them last night. They were like, "Oh, who's coming on the podcast?" Yes, Sam Hardy. So what does he do? Base jumping. And I showed them a couple of the videos, and they were just like, "Oh my god!" I mean, it's just insane, man. So I can't wait to ask a few questions about it. And if you're good to go, I'll shoot away question number one. You ready for that?
Yeah, sounds good, Louis.
Hell yeah, let's do it then. So, question one, roll back the clocks a bit then. So, how did you actually get into base jumping to start with? What was your first jump and how hard was it to do that very first one for you?
Uh, so, well, I'll start with just, I guess the best way to start would be just to talk about how I got into base jumping.
Mm.
So, way back when I was in college, I was studying to be an outdoor instructor, and I was climbing and bouldering and really dedicating my life towards that sort of area of extreme sports.
Mm-hmm.
And then a professional climber from the UK called Tim Emmett came to my college to do a talk about a new book that he had brought out. And I had never heard of base jumping ever. And he started talking about it. And I was like, hang on a sec. That means that if I could learn to base jump, I could climb up the mountains that I'm climbing now and up the cliff faces that I'm climbing. And then I could jump off with a parachute. And it kind of just made sense to me to like
Yeah.
try and go about it that way.
Mm.
And I managed to sit down with Tim at the end of his talk, and I said, "Look, I think this is like what I'm supposed to do." He said, "Well, man, the first thing you need to do is go skydiving." And at that time, I was 16 years old, so I'd had this seed planted in my brain, like, okay, I've got to start skydiving, and then I could slowly start investing time into understanding how I could base jump. Fast forward about a year, and after I finished college and I'd saved up enough money, I flew over to Spain and I did my skydiving course, which is called an AFF, which stands for Accelerated Freefall.
Mm-hmm.
And within that course, you do about 25 skydives within about a week sort of time, 10 days, depending on the weather. And you just learn how to skydive, you learn how to fly your body, you learn how to fly a parachute, you understand things about the weather. So it's really a basic introduction into freefall. And then after that, I ended up kind of, not having too much money because I was still studying. But while that was all happening for the next couple of years, I was just saving here and there as much as I could. And fast forward until I think I was 19. I continued skydiving a little bit on the weekends, putting all my time and energy into it. And then I managed to find a base jumping mentor his name was Uli, or his name is Uli, he's still around. And he was like living out in Portugal, a German fella. And I contacted him and said, "Hey, look, I'm really interested in starting to base jump. I've done some studying, I've done my homework. I think it's for me." And he said, "Well, come down to Portugal. We'll do some skydiving together. I'll make sure you're all good and we'll go from there." So I hopped in my camper van that I sort of built myself in the UK, and I drove down to Portugal, which took about 26 hours. And I turned up at this drop zone and met Uli. And then for the next 3 months, I stayed with him, and he taught me everything on the ground that I needed to know about base jumping. So I did some ground crewing for him. I was still skydiving. I was learning to fly my body a bit better. I was jumping a base jumping specific parachute out of an aeroplane and practicing on my accuracy. And then one day, out the blue, after I'd sort of done all the packing and been there for a few months, he said, "Hey, how do you feel about going through your first jump tomorrow?"
Wow.
And I said, "Really?" He was like, yeah, we're going to do it. I've organized it. We're going to go up to this bridge and we'll jump from it. So the next day, we headed out in the morning at like 4 a.m. and it's dark because over where we were jumping, it was illegal. So you have to jump at night. And I can honestly remember everything about the jump. And we were in this car and one of my friends had joined us as well. And his girlfriend was driving. And I remember we were driving across this bridge and it was really cold outside. It was like December in Portugal. It's quite chilly.
Yeah.
And, we hopped out and I had my parachute on. I had my helmet on. We ran around the car to the side of the bridge. And he said, okay, Sam, you know what to do. You're going to jump off the bridge. You're going to fly your parachute straight into the landing area and then we'll come and pick you up. I just thought it was the most badass thing ever, because it's like something that you'd see in a movie, but it was me really living it. And then, I remember climbing over the handrail and it was all wet and freezing cold. And I was like a little bit scared. But I knew that I was obviously going to jump because I've been training for it and I knew I wanted to do it. And it was just such an incredible moment of time in my life where for like years and years and years, you've dreamt about something.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it finally comes to fruition, you're like, oh my God, I'm actually here. This is actually happening. And as soon as I jumped, landed on the ground, I screamed at the top of my lungs, just like with pure joy and happiness. And that was where it all started. And I haven't stopped for 15 years. And now I have almost 2,500 base jumps. I've jumped in over 30 countries and I'm completely obsessed with it. And it's driven me a lot to achieve other goals in my life as well.
That's incredible, man. What a story. And so if we talk about kind of like the mentality side of that too, then, so in that first jump, how comparable is that actually to like the skydive? Obviously you can kind of, well, you can see the ground, but it's a long way off and you kind of understand the process of a skydive a little bit better. But obviously when you're sort of at a lower level thing, like on a bridge or something, you can see the ground. How sort of mentally comparable is that sort of an experience, especially for like the first time and committing to that?
I think probably one of the biggest things is kind of what you said. It's the visuals of it. So when you're skydiving, you generally exit around 13,000 to 15,000 feet up in the air. You're in free fall for quite a long time. Now, with that bridge that we went to, it was 80 meters high. So it's it's super, super low. And then you're just, you're thinking, oh, have I packed my parachute right? Is it going to open correctly? Are the wind conditions good? Is the weather okay? And you've got all these things racing through your head. But once all those things sort of line up and it feels like it's a yes, then actually committing to the jump itself is not too difficult. But in the beginning, if you're doing anything new in your life at any point, the first time you do it, it's scary because you're learning. And during that process of learning, it takes time to sort of understand what you're doing. So it was only really, I got super comfortable with the jumping side of things after probably, I don't know, I'd say between 150 and 200 jumps where I kind of felt like I knew what I was doing and I had some experience under my belt. And the rest of the time up to there, obviously you're learning, and then it's still been a continuum after that. And I'm even up to this day, I'm still learning so much,
Absolutely, yeah. So when did the kind of like the wingsuit stuff build its way into that too then? So I assume those first jumps you had were sort of like you jump off the bridge and then you've got the parachute and you're gliding to the ground. So when did the kind of the wingsuit stuff start to sort of come into these jumps that you were doing?
Yeah, so again, you're 100% correct there. So in the beginning with base jumping, you don't just kind of stick a wingsuit on and go up a cliff and jump off it. You've got to understand. I mean, some people have done that. But obviously, like, you've got to be able to master something before you go and do it. So in the beginning, let's say as a general rule of thumb, you want to really understand base jumping and do say between 200 to 500 base jumps before considering putting on a wingsuit.
Wow.
And then while you're base jumping, you want to be training wingsuit skydiving. I'd say, again, at least for 200 to 500 jumps. And then there'll become a point where you think, okay, I can combine the two now. I'm going to take my wingsuit that I've been skydiving with, and I know how to fly it on its head, on its belly, on its back. I'm really comfortable with that sort of toy or machine as such. And then I'm going to take it into the base jumping environment. And then again, it's a whole nother thing to go and learn, because although you do have flying fundamentals and skills from the skydiving environment, you're not used to the base jumping environment where things are much closer. You have to be able to maintain speed. There's a lot of visual references and visual visuals that are generally used when you're flying with a wingsuit close to the ground, or even if you're just base jumping with it naturally. And I think before I did my first wingsuit base jump, I think I had about 800 wingsuit skydives from a plane and about 200 base jumps. And I felt pretty comfortable when it came to it. And this was, I think it was about 12 years ago, maybe 13 years ago. So at that time, the wingsuit sort of where they are now as the technology's grown, they were quite basic wingsuits back then in comparison to the ones today.
Yeah, I can imagine things have really evolved so much. And so obviously, like you said, you've done probably how many jumps do you think you've actually realistically done? Probably like grand and a half or something, 2,000 more. Whereabouts are you?
Yeah, base jumps I've done about. So with the base jumps, I've done roughly 2,500.
Wow.
And as far as like numbers go around the world, that would put me at relatively a high amount of experience in comparison to other base jumpers. Typically, like 500 base jumps would be someone who has, a good amount of experience. 1,000 has a fair amount of experience, is pretty good. But anything past there, it's quite a heavy amount of experience under your belt. And then with the skydiving, I have about 3,500 to 4,000 skydives.
Wow. I mean, that's a serious number. And so just thinking about it then, so obviously all this stuff, people kind of tend to hear like the stories of things kind of going wrong and stuff. So there's obviously like 8% chance somewhere, very low, obviously, of something going wrong. So have you ever had like a close call or something that's been like where you've actually been close to having like a big problem, or have you just had a clean run really so far?
I've had a relatively clean run within base jumping. I've had no broken bones, which is pretty impressive because typically most base jumpers have broken bones at some point.
Sure.
So I feel pretty fortunate and thankful for that. As far as close calls go, I mean, naturally you're gonna probably have something of a close call at some point if you continue base jumping. Because at the end of the day, you're jumping off of a cliff or a building with a parachute on your back at high speed. Think that the parachute's A, going to open, and B, going to open in the correct direction. You just have to have the skill set to be able to know exactly what to do in a very high pressure situation. And I feel that the way that I kind of react to things is quite fast anyway. So as far as bad experiences go, not really too much. I think the worst one I ever had, and it is definitely I definitely know it's the worst one I ever had, was a friend and myself. We were out in Ethiopia in Africa, and we were doing some base jumps out there, some world firsts that hadn't been jumped in an area called the Simeon Mountains.
Wow.
And it was, incredible. We're out in the middle of nowhere in this beautiful area. They call it the Little Grand Canyon of Africa. And we had found this cliff, and we were in our wingsuits, and we said, this looks like it's all good. And we measured it with the lasers and the technology that we did have, which at the time was some basic map skills. And basically what ended up happening was I kind of pushed as hard as I could off the cliff because it was quite positive. And as I was just getting into flight with the wingsuit, the cliff really was quite positive. I ended up hitting my right foot on the bottom of the wall at about 80 meters down. So it's probably traveling close to 80, 100 miles an hour, and it knocked me to my side. And then I almost it was a very, very close call. That if I didn't have the reactions and all of that experience prior to be able to fly the wingsuit as well as I could and deal with that situation, it would have ended in, the worst case scenario.
Yikes, man. That's a scary one. But yeah, I'm really glad you had a clean career so far. No broken bones is always a good thing in any sport and any career, I think. But yeah, so anyway, let's talk about the kind of the mindset thing then. So question 2, I think I read about 3% to 6% of people have fear of heights, like actual proper fear of heights, not just sort of like I'm scared to do this one time and then they do it. I do personally have a bit of that too, and I know others who do as well. Even if it's a small degree, base jumping is definitely a major test to be able to commit to something like that. So in your experience, experience with the teaching side of things too, and the instructing in your career and everything, what is the process for actually overcoming these fears when it comes to something like this? And does that process change at all for the severity of the fear a student has? Obviously, you said a lot about the kind of like the numbers of things and doing 200, 400, 800, that kind of thing. But if you actually have like a fear of heights, do you think that ever actually goes, or do you think is there a way to kind of beat that, especially if it's bad?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think a good way to answer this would be to say, if let's say that you and me went for a walk, okay, we ended up on a cliff together, and let's say that cliff edge was 1,000 meters right down to the bottom, okay, but we don't have parachutes on. Now, if you stand up towards that edge, how is it going to make you feel?
Horrible. Yeah, literally, yeah.
It's going to make you feel horrible, right? Like your hands are going to start sweating, your heart's going to start racing. That adrenaline, that primal instinct that we've got millions of years of evolution behind us is going to kick in and say, if I fall off this, it's going to be horrible. Okay, and then you're going to die at the bottom of the cliff, and that's it. Your life's over. Now, what's different is when you put a parachute on and you know that how that parachute works and you can fly your body, you go up to the edge and it's the complete opposite feeling. You think, I can jump off this, I can fly away from this cliff, and I can open my parachute and land it on the ground. So suddenly that mindset changes, but that takes time to understand. So with the students, when we're coaching them and teaching them and running courses through the summer, a lot of them have already done that pre-training. So our prerequisite to come onto the course and base jump with us is a minimum of 300 skydives, but none of them have base jumped before. So when we go out to the bridge for their first jumps, the sort of feeling in the air is just almost like a bit of panic, a bit of worry, a bit of uncertainty, some anxiety, and everyone's kind of like, oh my God, we're actually going to do this. But the way that we structure the course is we start with very simple basic jumps, and on the first jump we'll actually hold a part of the parachute for them so they don't need to do anything except jump. And then we start introducing free falls, and then we start introducing free fall with what we call stow jumps, which is where the small parachute opens. The big parachute is inside of the container itself.
Okay.
So it's really I'd say it's a very well thought out course. It's very structured. And then as long as the students listen to us through the course, they can pass with flying colors generally.
Okay, cool. So what I'm taking from this then, so basically the way I sort of see it is like there's a couple of different kinds of fear. So when you have something like the whole vertigo thing and you're scared of heights, obviously anyone who goes up onto this bridge is going to be, terrified for the first time, unless you're like built completely differently. And so there's that kind of like initial fear, and then you can kind of, it's just like of the experience, not the unknown sort of thing. But then there's the sort of fear that's kind of the default setting, almost like you're kind of born of that fear of heights. And I mean, for me, you say about, you have that parachutes and everything, that it's meant to work a certain way. But for example, like those kind of clear glass floors and stuff at high points, even kind of that sort of thing, I know I'm not going to fall through it, but I'm still like, oh my God, I really don't want to do this. So for people who have that sort of like inbuilt default sort of natural fear of heights, that's just, walking over a bridge and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm getting dizzy. Do you think that ever actually goes for those kind of people? Do you think like even that sort of thing, does that also sort of get worked out with the experience?
Yeah, I think it's almost the same with everything. It's just having exposure to things that make you uncomfortable. And that's what base jumping and other extreme sports is really good for, because if you want to progress in the sport of base jumping, you have to be able to kind of push yourself a bit more each time. And it's the same, I feel like, with anything. So let's say surfing. If you're going out surfing for the first time, you're going to be really scared of being in the water, especially if your feet aren't touching the ground, you're in the water, you're in, let's say some small waves, but all that environment is quite new. It's testing you as a human.
Yep.
And then it is scary to do that. Maybe the waves get a little bit bigger on another day and then you get even more scared. But I truly believe that apart, being sort of like a really, I don't know how, maybe the best way to say it, but being a good athlete is about exposing yourself to that as much as you can, and then being comfortable with the environment that you're in. And base jumping naturally does do that for you, you know, like there's different jumps all around the world, and you may say, oh man, I really want to do that jump one day, but all the training beforehand is getting you there with the experience that you need.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I spoke to some of the kind of like the parkour guys in that community and the people who do the sort of like the building jumps and everything. And you see the stunts and you kind of imagine it for yourself. And then you sort of think, I could never commit to something like this. But actually, it's that, like you said, the practice, and it's all of that preparation and the real understanding of exactly what's going on here, distances, what needs to happen, and then the practice and the run-ups and everything to it. That's all been rehearsed a lot. So obviously, like you said, that's the kind of way to deal with these things. It's just really, really sort of understand exactly what you're doing. So question 3, what advice would you give to someone who is interested in getting started in base jumping? And what precautions should they take? Are there any really dangerous common mistakes when starting that should be clarified early on? And another little side question too, is you said that there's, you need to do 200 odd skydives. Skydiving is expensive. So how can you sort of find a way around that? And how do you sort of go about getting into it?
Yeah, I mean, that's like the $1 million question, really, is how do I do this base jumping stuff? And realistically, the answer is you have to commit your whole life to it. That's how I really feel about it. The alternative is, if you are wealthy and you have, you're comfortable financially, then it's just a time situation from there. So for a lot of people who are heavily involved in skydiving, and the same with base jumping, they really have committed a lot of their money and time and energy into it to be able to sort of reap that benefit as such. So for anyone that does want to start, or to any listeners that are thinking, yeah, I'd love to go base jumping and start doing this journey, I would, give it like a 7-year target. Give yourself 7 years from today until 7 years away, maybe 5 if you're really committed. To basically go through all the training that needs to be done beforehand. So that'll be going out somewhere, falling in love with skydiving, really getting to grips with skydiving, flying a parachute, understanding how to fly your body, learning how to fly a tracking suit, which is what we use to fly away from the cliffs. And then, once you've done that over several years, what will naturally happen is there's base jumpers we call them drop zones at skydiving centers. We call them drop zones. Naturally, there'll be someone who has a friend who base jumps, or maybe a base jumper's there, and then you could say, hey, I'd really like to come out and watch you base jump. I'd like to see how you pack your parachute. And then you're sort of getting involved in that environment. And then, I'm sure at some point there'll be someone that you go, oh, I really want to learn with this guy, which could be me, or maybe another mentor somewhere else around the world. And then you would come and do a course, take part in a course, and sort of go from there.
Fantastic stuff. So if someone does want to do that, and they do want to commit their life to doing this thing, and they just think, wow, okay, you know what? I'm doing this. So any keen base jumpers out there who are getting started or want to get started, can you recommend perhaps a top 3 favorite base jump locations that you've jumped from? And maybe one extra one too that you haven't been to yet, but really want to, that's on the bucket list.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I guess, as it's probably the most current, I should probably say that one of my most memorable jumps, because it was how many days ago? I think like last week sometime. I headed out to Venezuela, and I just base jumped off of Angel Falls, which is the highest waterfall in the world. It's about 1,000 meters high. So for me at the moment, that was a very, very big highlight of my base jumping career. And that was a massive journey to get there. Now I'm living in San Diego. I took 5 commercial flights to get to Caracas in Venezuela. And then I took a private plane from Caracas with a group of other jumpers and friends from there to a place called Canaima. And then we took a 7 hour boat journey up part of the Amazon River in the rainforest for about 6-7 hours. And then we had a helicopter fly in and land in the river and pick us up.
Wow.
And then took us to the top. So it took, I think all in all, it took me about 6 days to get up, 6 days of traveling and, figuring everything out to be able to get there, and then managed to jump. So that was a really, really good experience that I've just had recently. Another really fantastic jumping area is basically all of France. France is a real mecca for base jumping. There's some really, really good cliffs that you can jump off with a wingsuit and also without a wingsuit. So that's a super nice area. And then probably South Africa as well. That's got some really nice base jumping out in South Africa. And it's funny because all these places, what ends up happening is you get to travel, which is amazing. You get to meet new people, which is really, really cool. You get to go to different communities, try different food, try different beer, which is always fun as well.
Always.
Yeah. And then you get involved in sort of the country that you're in, which is amazing because that's part of it. So for me, I'm like a traveler at heart. I really like traveling and seeing different parts of the world. But then when you get to throw some base jumping into it too, it gets even more special. And you end up, well, you always end up somewhere a little bit different off the beaten path that most people wouldn't go to, because you would only go to this, say, specific location to jump from it.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be no other reason to go there, you know. Then a bucket list jump for me is probably the highest one for me is going to be Cave of the Swallows down in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually I think it's in a David Attenborough documentary. It's absolutely fantastic. So for anyone that is wondering what is Cave of the Swallows, I would say hop onto YouTube and type in Cave of the Swallows base jump. It's been on my bucket list for a long time, but at the moment, I did try to go a few years ago, but just the community around that area in Mexico aren't too keen on having base jumpers jump into their cave. So at the moment, it's off the cards, but maybe in the future, it could be a possibility.
Nice one. Actually, that's just kind of brought something up in my head I want to ask about too, just before we wrap this up. So how does kind of like the legal side of this all kind of tie into it? Obviously, you have like the sports stuff, which is all organized, and you have all the kind of the Red Bull things and all this, and that's obviously organized well. But if you're someone who's kind of going into it, what do you sort of need to know about sort of the more kind of locations that are a bit more remote and stuff and going into different countries? How does that sort of work? Or is it kind of all organized and done through the authorities? How does this kind of go? That tells me everything.
So let's say, yeah, basically there's a lot of gray areas with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll throw a few different things out there. So there's an area in Switzerland called Lauterbrunnen. In that area of that valley, base jumping is legal, 100%. So we actually work with the helicopters and the airspace there, and we're actually sort of counted for as part of the airspace.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go and jump from those cliffs, we ring the helicopter company and say, hey, we've got 2 people jumping off of this exit point. Do we have clear airspace to jump? And they'll say, yeah, no worries. That's it. There's also another place in Italy called Monte Brento, which is another legal area that you can jump in. Same sort of thing there as well. But then as soon as you start looking into, like, let's say some buildings in London, that's where it is the gray area. So maybe you need to get into that building and you shouldn't need to get, you see where I'm going with this? Like,
yeah.
How do you get into that? Maybe you're going to have to unpick a lock or maybe climb through a window, which would then put you into a classification of like breaking and entering.
Right.
So that's really kind of like the legal side of it. Now, typically, most jumping locations around the world are legal. So I'll rephrase that. Most cliff places are legal. So if you're jumping from like an earth object itself, something that's not man-made, generally it's legal. Mm-hmm. But then you have countries, say like Austria, who completely ban base jumping from anything.
Right.
So you're not actually anywhere in Austria. It's the same in Nevada in the United States. California, you're not really supposed to be jumping off the cliffs. Now, our sort of rule as base jumpers is we're not damaging the environment. And if anything, we are kind of environmentalists. So something that I like to teach is that, let's say we're heading out base jumping, and while we're going to the exit point or we're going up to the jump, if you see any trash on the floor, pick it up, because that's like the best thing you can do for the environment. So always try and do something better while you are going out jumping, and it kind of like outweighs some of the good and the bad at the same time, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
But really, yeah, the legal side of things, it only gets bad if you're breaking into, you know, buildings, or maybe there's like a massive antenna that you want to climb up and you definitely shouldn't be on it. So that's typically why you would do that at night, so you can't be seen. But those jumps are always really fun as well.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. It's so cool, and yeah, you kind of see the same sorts of things with like the parkour guys and everything, and yeah, it's great fun at the end of the day, and we always love being naughty as people, don't we? But yeah, man. So just last thing, then, what can we expect to see from you coming up in the future? Obviously, you know, you've been doing some crazy stuff over the last week and a bit and everything. I've seen the videos, mental. Any sneak previews for any of the next big adventures?
Yeah, this year I've got quite a lot planned with the school. So my best friend and myself, Christopher McDougall, and myself, we run Learn to Base Jump, which is a pretty good name for base jumping. So if you do ever want to come base, type Learn to Base Jump into Google and you'll find us. So we've got a really, really busy year ahead of us. Got lots of students, lots of courses, a few events, and then hopefully I should be going out to Japan to do a demo down a ski mountain, which would be really cool because I haven't been to Japan for a few years. And then maybe this year, hopefully, fingers crossed, it depends on a few things, but the World Wingsuit League should be back on.
Wow.
And the World Wingsuit League is an event held out in China where 16 of us sort of go head to head racing our wingsuit down a mountain, hitting targets, flying through tight gullies and stuff like that. So if I do get to go out, I will be representing the UK, so which would be pretty cool.
Wow, that's awesome, man. Thanks for doing it. We appreciate it for sure. But yeah, man, so that has been the 4 questions done for today. And before we wrap this up, it is time for what I like to call the shameless plug. You've obviously mentioned about the school, but yeah, please send my my fans and my listeners all the way to your Instagram and all the things that you're up to. Shameless plug away, my man.
Cool. Well, I mean, I would just say if you want to follow some cool base jumping and extreme sports, then you can check us out on Sam Hardy Base. And if you're interested in learning to base jump, or it's something you are interested in, then you can find us on Instagram with the school, which is at Learn to Base Jump.
Fantastic stuff. Sam, thank you so much for joining me today for the Talk4 podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure to meet you. I love it. Base jumping last week, podcasting this week, crazy stuff.
Cool. Thanks very much for having us, Louis. I appreciate it, buddy.
Fantastic. Thank you, man. And thank you guys for listening too. This has been episode 70. And if you'd like to listen to the past episodes, go and have a look at the channel. And if you'd like to listen in for the future ones, make sure to hit that subscribe button and spread some love by leaving a like and a comment. Signing off for now.